Hey guys, this is Auty Brooks, and I'm coming back to you today with a whiteboard video on considerations for programming pulling exercises. Now, it's important prior to getting into the variables to identify a few key things before we talk about them. So the first thing you want to identify is the goal of the program or the goal of practicing that exercise. And for today's purposes, we're just going to assume that we're using pulling movements to develop strength and build muscle, okay? The other important thing that we need to identify prior to giving general recommendations on programming variables is the maturation of the trainee, or who it's for. So in this case, we're just going to assume that this is for somebody who's in an intermediate level of training, somebody who's been training progressively properly for 2 to 5 years. So that kind of sets some of the groundwork for the details underneath each of the programming considerations. Okay, so let's talk about the first programming consideration, and that is consistency is key. And that's not really a variable that you manipulate, it's just an important thing to say, because really at the end of the day, if you are consistent, you're practicing the exercise, there's going to be some result that you get from that. So you overlay a good, consistent, hard-working effort even over a crummy program, and you're still going to see some form of results. And that's why I sort of underline that at the beginning. Okay, now let's talk about some of the variables you can manipulate to fine-tune and improve the result from your exercise. Frequency. Frequency is the number of times you perform the exercise in a week. Generally speaking, you should be practicing a movement 2 to 4 times a week. Intensity is literally the weight on the bar, and that could be expressed as a percentage of a 1 rep max. So for that purpose, a prescription of 65% to 90% should be used. Muscle building should be more on the lower end, strength training on the higher end, although that's not an exclusive statement. Another method of correlating intensity could be RPE, which is rate of perceived exertion, and that can be measured as a scale of 1 to 10. In this case, I'm suggesting staying in between a 7 and a 9 RPE, which just really means you're staying in between 3 reps left in the tank and 1 rep left in the tank as a part of programming for strength and muscle. Volume is how many working sets you perform in the week total for that particular movement or muscle. And again, a general recommendation should be around 10 to 20 sets per week. However, this is something that we'll see in the next slide is a progression over the course of weeks, months, and even years of training. So this outlines the basic variables for manipulating the weight on the bar, the sets and reps that you do, and how many times a week you're going to be doing those. Now let's talk about progression. Progression is key. This is the mechanism that drives results. A program should progress from lighter to heavier, or from less sets to more sets, depending on what you're doing. In the case of building muscle, the key variable to progress is volume. So in the most simplest form, a program should start with lower volume, number of sets, we'll say 10, the minimum of the previously recommended variable, and progress over the course of the program to the higher range of sets, in this case 20. Okay, so that in its basic form is how you would progress a program directed at building muscle. For strength training, the variable that you want to manipulate is intensity, in this case percentage of 1 rep max. So this, again, in its most simplest form, illustrates how over the course of a program, the time that it takes you to complete it, the intensity or weight on the bar should titrate up slowly. In this case, from the low end of the spectrum to the high end of the spectrum. So again, progression is extremely important when developing a program. It's essentially what drives the result of the program. Next, we're going to talk about exercise selection. So for building muscle, a combination of isolation and compound exercises can be utilized. For strength, you want to stay more on the compound exercises. And we're talking functional movements like squatting, deadlifting, pressing, and in this case, rowing or doing something like a weighted chin-up are great options for building strength with pulling movements. Rep ranges. For building muscle, stick to the 6 to 12 rep range. It's been shown that you can build muscle on a spectrum of rep ranges, for example, as low as 3 all the way up to 30 repetitions per set. However, when it comes to considering building volume over a long course of time, the middle rep range, 6 to 12, seems to be the most effective. For strength, however, we want to stay in the lower rep ranges. The intensity is going to be higher, so we want to make sure that we can perform good technique for lower rep ranges and have a higher percentage of our 1 rep max on the bar. So for strength, I'm suggesting staying in the 3 to 5 rep range per set. The next variable you can manipulate is the rest in between sets. This is important because too little rest and you're not going to be able to be successful on subsequent sets, and too much rest, well, you run into issues with possibly spending too much time in the gym, wasting time in the gym and not making the most out of your time there. So again, some general recommendations for building muscle. Rest can be a bit shorter, 2 to 3 minutes, we'll say, and for strength, you want those rests to be longer so you can fully recover the nervous system and the other systems of the body. So 3 to 5 minutes is a general recommendation for strength training. Awesome. The last little point here I want to make is rep tempo. This is the style in which you're going to perform each repetition in your set. For hypertrophy or muscle building, the repetitions should be slow and controlled. You should accentuate the eccentric or the lowering phase of the movement and maintain constant tension. This will allow you to get the most out of each repetition in your set so you can get the most out of every set that you do. For strength, the rep tempo is a little bit different. The rep tempo suggestion is as fast as you can maintain your form. There is a benefit from moving a bit quicker through the range of motion for strength training, but the caveat here is you must maintain your technique. So if the speed at which you move through the range of motion causes your form to degrade, then we are not getting the benefit out of moving faster. So it's as slow as you need to be to maintain the technique of the exercise, which in the case of beginners to intermediates is usually a slower tempo, and in the case of more advanced trainees, they can speed up the movement and gain an advantage through things like the stretch reflex, etc. All right, so hopefully that was an easy and brief overview of programming considerations for pulling movements. Thanks, have a good day.